Hello, this is not going to be one of my usual videos. There's a game that's been announced recently called Mass Conflict Ignition, and there are some things about it that I wanted to talk about. This isn't really my usual style of content. I'm not really a good video editor. I'm not really even a good at doing vocals for videos, but I felt that there were some things I needed to say and that I had the experience and the knowledge to say them. I've done a bit of investigation as much as I can, and these are my thoughts on Mass Conflict Ignition. Just some introduction. Mass Conflict Ignition is a newly announced RTS seeking to emulate the gameplay of Command and Conquer Generals, which is a game that I'm quite fond of. It was first brought up about 3 weeks ago. Since then, several important videos were made. First, we have this official trailer. It's about a minute long. There's not any voiceover. It's really just gameplay that's showing a game demo basically for the game. And after that, three other videos were made. All of these videos say basically the same thing. They were essentially, I don't know what the order of operations here was, but the developers got into contact with each of these three video creators. Some details were shared, and we got a lot more information about the game. And these videos are really what my presentation, I guess. That's what this is based on. You should watch them. uh, Dominator and Apara basically made a very similar video. They go over all the same stuff. I recommend Apara's video more, but Dominator's is how I found out since I watch a lot of content related to Zero Hour on his channel. There's also this short video in Korean which says basically the same things. I don't speak Korean, of course, but thankfully all of the text was just on screen. I used OCR, optical character recognition, to translate it, and on first glance, it seems to say basically all of the same things that these other two videos do. Now, let's just get right into it. Now, in these videos, there were some claims and there were some promises that were made about the game, and I want to talk about those first. Some planned features. There's going to be a competitive multiplayer in Mass Conflict. Okay, that is the core feature. It makes sense to have that. That's basically why anyone would be interested in playing. And there's also going to be a single player campaign, of course, and big cinematics. All right. If you have a campaign, if you're going to go through the effort to design all those levels and scenarios, it makes sense to at least add a little bit of flair and a persistent conquest multiplayer mode where you would basically have like a map that different groups would fight for control over. So that it's basically a way to arrange matches where you are fighting not just for fun, but to achieve some kind of larger goal, and where your victories make your team basically do better. This isn't something that's in a lot of games. There are a few games that have gotten quite big doing this, but it's still pretty novel. And 10 playable faction. That's You can control the game with your voice. That's not in very many games. I mean, I know there's Tom Clancy's like End War. I've heard of it specifically because people bring it up in comparison to this game. I have never heard of that game before. I'll be the first to admit. And console support with crossplay. That's a lot. But let's just play devil's advocate. Let's Maybe the team can deliver on all of these promises if we interpret them in a specific way. If you're making a single player campaign, you're already doing a lot of the work for the multiplayer. You have to make all of the factions. If you're going to play all the factions, then they have to be at least somewhat balanced. They have to be able to fight each other and still have it feel fun. That's something that you're going to be doing for both of those. So work from one often translates to the other. Not perfectly, but there is definitely that overlap there. And cinematics, sure, that sounds expensive when you just say it out loud, but cinematics, you can absolutely do those on the budget. The original Command and Conquer, almost all of the cutscenes in that game were just somebody talking in front of a green screen. That's very achievable. The people in those cinematics weren't really even actors. I know the guy who played Kane had some acting experience, but even then, conquest mode, when you boil it down, that is really just a UI and some data. It's really just a very fancy matchmaking system, and you can. It takes a lot of work to make that engaging and entertaining, but if you just want to have it, it's doable. That's achievable. And one thing that the developers haven't been clear on when I've been asking, If you count each general as its own faction, if we do the system like the base 0 hour game, then this would be less factions than the original, less than 0 hour, I should say. Because in that game, there were 3 generals for each faction, plus a vanilla version of that faction. That's 12, whereas this game is only promising 10. If we interpret it in that way, that's very achievable. Voice control, I'm not a big believer. It's, to me, reads as a gimmick. It doesn't read as like a real feature, but even then, if you just wanted to do it, there's a lot of voice control algorithms, technology that you can just very quickly pull off of GitHub without really spending a lot of money or time. You might have even seen something like a YouTube challenge where if the guy says a certain word, his car blows up in Grand Theft Auto or whatever. That's the level of accessible that we're talking about here. You can absolutely set up something basic very easily. And a console port, if you were playing competitively on console, you would be at a massive disadvantage just because you don't have a keyboard. But if all you want is to just play like the single player, and if that was like specifically balanced to be easier on console, then yeah, I can see that. I can see making that work and having a console port. Still, some things are going to cost you a lot of money no matter how half you ask them. For example, a $100,000 tournament. What? That's that's a lot of money. Where did they get that kind of money? Where is this $100,000 coming from? Where did they get it? They didn't. There was an initial investment of 65,000 US dollars. That was communicated to me by a private source, and I've had it corroborated by some other people. But most of that money was spent to make the demo, the thing that you see in Dominators in video and in the trailer. That's where that money mostly went. I don't know how much is left over, but it can't be much. And even if they had still all of the money, they do not have enough to host a tournament. And I have confirmed this. I have nailed this down with the developer that they do not have the money. That this is entirely a hypothetical sum for a tournament that, as far as I'm concerned, does not exist. For reference, Zero Space, a game that crowdfunded about 540,000 US dollars on Kickstarter, has a $10,000 tournament. That's 1/10 the size. Stormgate, a game that raised almost $2.2 million, $10,000 tournament. Much smaller. This is insanity. This isn't business 101. This is business 001. This is what you're expected to know before you even start your classes. You're expected to know it just by walking in. Giving away money you do not have is not something that a successful business does. This is the most basic financial principle that you could possibly imagine. This is our. I struggle to communicate. Some people seem to not understand that this is just absolutely bonkers. You don't do this. Okay, but like, surely they have a plan to get money, right? We'll get VC funding. The developers have made it very clear that they expect to get money specifically from venture capital and possibly some angel investors if they can find any, but that is not a great answer, and there's a few reasons for that. Monetization is the big one. Venture capital firms want money. That's all they want, and they want to make it off of you specifically. They would like it as quickly as possible. Now, if they had crowdfunded the game, like those other 2 games I mentioned, Zero Space and Stormgate, the only people they would have to be beholden to, the only people they would have to care about are the people who pay for the game, the people who crowdfund them, because that's their audience. And all the crowdfunders really want is a game that they can enjoy, that is fun, that is worth their money. Even if you work with a publisher, even if that's where you get your money from, a publisher still has motives other than specifically milking your customers dry. For example, Sony, a console publisher, right? They might deliberately, knowingly fund a game that they don't expect to make its money back, just as a way to promote the platform. They might make a big cinematic single-player game just for the prestige, just to make the console itself more appealing for niches of gamers. And the thing about making money directly off of an RTS is that it is notoriously a very expensive to develop genre, and it's also very unprofitable historically. You do not make a lot of money on RTS compared to other genres, and there were exceptions to this. Warcraft 3 being like the big one in terms of games that absolutely did make a huge landing in the RTS space, but this is not going to be one of them if we're being completely realistic. It's not going to happen. Now, the way that they expect to make their money is by charging both an upfront fee, so you pay to buy the game, and there's also going to be cosmetic microtransactions, according to the developer. They've confirmed this to me. And even though they've told me explicitly that there will not be any pay to win content, that's easy for them to say now. It's not going to be easy when there's somebody banging on their door saying, "Why haven't you made me a bajillion dollars off of your game? You said you would get better performance and you're not." That's the point where I worry about something being introduced. I obviously know the developers have pure intentions on some level. They want to make a good game just like I want to play a good game. But when you have that pressure, I worry that there will be a very significant chance that they collapse, that they crumble, that they add things that we wouldn't agree to now after we've already bought the game or after the game is already underway and already paid for or whatever else, that's not necessarily a permanent state of affairs. Now let's talk a bit about who's developing this game. In the videos, if you hear Dominator tell it, the lead developer, the guy he spoke to, who is also the CEO of Misclick Games and has been a 0-hour player in the past, apparently at least at a somewhat high level, although I wasn't able to verify that. Dominator says this guy's got 15 years of experience, and I don't think that's Domi's fault, but it's very clear that the developer is inflating that number, because when I try to interrogate that number, it turns into 12 years of experience in the game industry, exclusively at mobile developers, I should add. But only 8 of those years are actually spent making games. A lot of the experience on that developer's resume is stuff like PR, which I'm not going to downplay the role that plays in a game's success, but at the same time, that's not really the same thing, is it? And 4 of those years were management experience, which is fine. You don't need that much time to become accustomed to managing. There can definitely be benefits, but I'm willing to take that. And apparently he worked on over 200 projects. I wasn't able to really nail that down because the first one he mentions, an upcoming horror game called Death Relives, which from what I've seen is something that's pretty anticipated. It's coming from Turkey, so that aligns geographically because the developers are also Turkish. So I could believe that he worked on this game, but it was as a special thanks. I don't want to pretend that the people who get into the special thanks section of the credits haven't done anything, but at the same time, I don't know what that means. That could mean anything from I made the entire game engine that you're working with, or it could just mean I helped you set up at a con one time and you wanted to thank me. That could mean anything. There's no consistent standard. I don't, when that's the project that you tell me about first, I have concerns. In terms of past titles, this lead guy also mentions that some members of their team worked on Hitman 1 and 2, Star Wars Rogue Empire, Empires at War. These are big games. These are AAA games, but I couldn't verify this. Because the moment he said it, he backed away. He was like, they worked on all these games since you care so much about experience, but I'm not going to tell you anything more. He dropped that and ran away, basically. I could not verify who on the team did this, whether they're still on the team, what they did on these games. I have no clue whatsoever. In terms of games that the lead has personally worked on, all that I got were some mobile games. He gave me 2. Crashmaster 3D, which reviewed apparently fairly well and got a lot of downloads, and Merge Rivals, which did not get very many downloads and did not review particularly well. There may be some other games that are in his catalog that he hasn't mentioned, but these were the ones that he volunteered. You know, I'm not going to pretend that making a mobile game is something that I could just do in a day in Unity, although there are certainly games that are the case for, but this is not the same scope. This is not the same scale as making a real-time strategy game with multiplayer and a campaign. This is not even in the same galaxy. So when we get from 15 years of experience, when I have to haggle him down to this, that tells me that this team is trying to make itself seem more experienced than it perhaps really is. And of course, another thing that this is something that if you're watching the video, it can just slip past you without being noticed. But they have unpaid volunteers. EA, like I'm sorry, I just cannot condone this in any project that's trying to make money, which this explicitly is. And I'm not allergic to volunteer work. I do a ton of volunteer work, a lot of unpaid work. That's, if anything, that is probably the majority of the things that I have worked on as a video game developer, is work for which I have not been directly compensated. And that's fine, but there's a very simple principle I have. If one person is getting paid, everybody is getting paid. There can't be this disparity in who gets to take home a paycheck for their contributions. You can't have that in a real company. Like, some of these volunteers are people who I'm not going to pretend that it's fine to not pay somebody if they're just a community manager, or if they're just like somebody who did like localization work. But this is we're talking about people who have done programming, done modeling. We're talking about the people who actually make like the core product, where this game would not exist without their work, and they're not being paid for it, because of course having unpaid volunteers is such a good sign for success. That's, in the past, clearly this is an indicator to look for, where we can say, yeah, this game's definitely doing well if they can't afford to pay everybody. And lastly, there are, of course, the legal issues. This is probably what the first thing to come to mind was for some people, but for me, it's probably the last. I do still want to talk about it because it is not copyright infringement to copy basic mechanics. If you want to have a game that's real-time strategy, where you have to build your units, where you have to collect supplies with like a specific kind of unit in a specific manner, and where you get XP when you kill enemy units, and that XP gives you level ups, which lead to abilities like calling in an airstrike or artillery or something like that. That is not something you can copyright. It is copyright infringement to copy the entire USA faction from Command and Conquer Generals, which is what we see in the video, which is the only thing we see. And the thing is, like, this is, this is perhaps a legal, untested ground, but when it comes to the past cases in other media, this is the kind of thing where you can lose big. Copyright law is one of the most expensive fields. It's so much more expensive than something like small claims or even a criminal court in a lot of cases. It's just, you will get sucked dry if they even get you through the courthouse doors. If they think there is even a possibility, if the people at EA think there is even a likelihood that a judge will agree with them, you could basically say goodbye to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in court fees. That would kill the game. Like, this is a game that's being developed for a profit, which directly competes with EA's existing titles. This would not get fair use. This would not come close to reaching a fair use defense. So it is copyright infringement, and they don't have a defense for it. And when I've talked to the developers about it, they seem kind of wishy-washy. Basically, what they say is, "Oh, we're gonna change more. We're gonna have, it's not just going to be General's 0 Hour and nothing else." But then, what is it? Because if you wanted a 0 Hour remake, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be getting your hopes up, because that's everything I've talked about here tells me that this studio is in rocky waters, and that they're probably going to hit one of those rocks, that their vessel is going to end up sinking off the shore before it ever makes it aground. I wish there was another game like 0 Hour on the horizon that I could be looking forward to, but I'm sorry, that's just not going. There is just no indication to me that this team can deliver on any of their promises. I would love to give you a more optimistic reading, tell you that, okay, maybe the odds aren't in their favor, but they have a chance. But I don't think they do. I don't even think they have a chance. I think that there are so many things that have already gone wrong before I've even touched the game, that there is no possible way that they're going to be able to make up for this, that this team is going to be able to deliver. I just don't think it can happen. I'm sorry to leave you on such a sour note, but that is really what I think about Mass Conflict Ignition.